Taoiseach,
please.
Taoiseach, I think you're aware, particularly from the presentation of Governor Honohan to the Oireachtas last week, that there are now over 97,400 mortgages in arrears for over 90 days, and that the central bank is warning about a 9.3 billion mortgage debt mountain. Now, the problem, as demonstrated by Governor Honohan, is that he's very unhappy with the response of the banks to this particular crisis, which is causing immense distress out there to thousands and thousands of families and affecting their capacity in terms of day-to-day living. And he confirmed that 74,000 of the 98,000 mortgage holders in arrears of more than 90 days at the end of June were not yet in arrangement with their lender. So effectively 75% of distressed mortgages are not being dealt with as of now. So that's an extraordinary, I think, revelation by the Governor, and one of that causes deep concern across the country. He also accused the main banks of engaging in wishful thinking on the issue of resolving the mortgage arrears crisis, saying that there appeared to be a belief that the issues would cure themselves. But I think of most alarm, Taoiseach, is that not only are the banks not moving fast enough to tackle the problem, but the majority of them are opting to go down the repossession or surrender route, with almost two-thirds of mortgage holders in arrears being threatened with legal action.
Thank you.
Of the 35,000 proposed resolutions offered by banks to the end of June, 62% referred to surrender or repossession of property. Now, Taoiseach, you've come in here time and time again and said that repossession would be the last resort. However, we now know that repossessions and evictions are the first resort and not the last resort, as promised by government. Will you at this stage, Taoiseach, intervene and establish an independent office to deal with this issue once and for all, and to ensure that customers and those particularly in mortgage arrears get a fair hearing from their banks?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, first of all, the entire mortgage crisis and the banking crisis is the central issue of the legacy that this government inherited. And to sit back and do nothing about it would make the situation even worse. Now, I dealt yesterday with the mortgage crisis when you legitimately asked a question about it yesterday as well. Now, it's not true to say that the first port of call is repossession. The family home in this country is of fundamental and immense importance to people and their families. There's a difference. Quiet now, Timmy. Quiet now. There's a difference between buy-to-let and the principal family home. Yesterday I pointed out to you, and let me assure you, Deputy Martin, I don't speak here as an advocate for the banks. We have had a lot of engagement and a lot of work and a lot of legal involvement in putting a situation where there's a whole range of options open now for a solution for everybody who's in mortgage distress. The Governor himself confirmed during the week that at the 30th of June there were 770,610 private residential mortgage accounts, and out of that 97,874, or 12.7%, were in arrears of greater than 90 days. Now, Deputy Martin, it's not good enough that the banks have not stepped up to the mark in the way that we want here. It's not good enough. But we've engaged with them. The regulator here is the central bank. The Governor of the central bank has been very clear in that if he wanted extra powers from government, all he has to do is look for them. The point is, the central bank, as the regulator, has now to audit the figures that have been submitted by the banks. 80,000 mortgages have been restructured. I assume that those 80,000 are not just recipients of letters indicating legal action. And 24,000 of those, 24,000 new restructures in the last quarter. Now, I have to assume, without the verifiable audit from the central bank, that these are sustainable solutions, both for the borrower and for the lender, that there's a solution worked out which everybody wants to see. And the central bank and the governor have also confirmed that 76.5% of the stock of restructures are deemed to be meeting the terms of the restructured arrangement.
Thank you.
So, Deputy Martin, from looking at the entire catastrophic mess that you left behind you, we've put in place a series and a whole range of options, including the personal insolvency arrangement, where there is an answer to everybody's problem. But I would say to people listening out there today, the first imperative is that there be engagement between the borrower and the lender, because somebody's got to sit down with people and say, can we cut a deal here that's in the interests both of the borrower and of the lender? And in the case of where people use the personal insolvency agency, the practitioners go through all the circumstances pertaining to each person and each mortgagee, so that the best option can be put in place for them. I'm not happy, Deputy Martin.
Thank you.
Not happy that the banks have not measured up in the way that we would like. They themselves had their problems, in that their people had become used to throwing out money all over the place without being able to deal with the crisis and the consequences of that. Yes, there are people in distress this morning, but this is the evidence from the governor himself as a consequence of the actions put in place by the government. But the central bank is the licensee, the licensor, is the regulator, and the central bank have required the government now, have required the banks to submit and meet their targets, and will audit the figures that they've submitted.
Thank you.
You have failed to make any meaningful impact on the mortgage arrears issue. The number of mortgage arrears, people in arrears over 90 days, has quadrupled since 2009. It's getting much worse, and getting worse by the day. And Taoiseach, the governor said it last week. He said, despite all our efforts, far too many arrears cases have still remained untreated. The governor, essentially what he said last week, amounted or was tantamount to an admission of failure in relation to this particular issue. And Taoiseach, 35,000 proposed resolutions offered by the banks to the end of June referred to surrender or repossession of property. That's the governor's statistics. How can you credibly come into the House and say that repossessions are a last resort, when the evidence from the central bank itself is the opposite?
Thank you.
That the banks, first and foremost, are referring people to repossession or surrender of property. That's the reality of what is happening out there right now. And the problem is, Taoiseach, that you did surrender control of this to the banks, and you did put them into the driving seat by legislation after the Dunn judgment, and by diluting the protections to the consumer under the Code of Conduct. And those fundamentally put the banks in the driving seat, and there seems to be a major issue here. There is a major issue here in terms of resolving this crisis. It's getting much worse by the day.
Thank you, Deputy. Sure.
Well, it's a bit rich coming from you as a member of your party, who admitted openly last week that you allowed a situation where taxes became too low, where public spending became too high, and where you lost control completely. You lost control completely of the fact that billions.
Settle down.
Billions.
Settle down, please. Settle down. Thank you.
And a member of your government was the first to admit from this seat over here that the government needed no more taxes, that we had enough stamp duty to run the country, and started off a housing crisis. Now, the figures I've given you, Deputy Martin, are the authentic figures from the governor of the central bank. And if you want to say that he's not telling us the facts, well then say so. 80,000 mortgages have been restructured. 24,000 new restructures in the last quarter. 24,000. And of that, the central bank have indicated that 76.5 of those restructures are now deemed to be meeting the terms of sustainable and restructured arrangements. Now, that's a fact as verified by the central bank. The figures submitted by the banks to the central bank as their regulator have now to be audited by the central bank, and we'll know the true facts when they do that. It does take a long time, Deputy Martin, to uncover the dark depths of what you left behind here. And the people of this country will never let you forget that the kind of conduct brought about by your government has wreaked havoc, economic crisis in family after family. And this government have put in place a suite of measures, a range of options that will allow for those mortgages, for those persons in distress with their mortgages, to have one of these solutions put in place to get them out of it.